Okay, friends, we are talking about a topic that we actually have talked about before here on the show, and I have personally done a lot of experimenting and reading and research on it. But even so, I'm still very intrigued by this topic and very curious about it because although I've had success around it, there's still a lot of unknowns for me, and there's still a lot of questions I have and things I'm trying to figure out. And the topic is fresh milled flour. It could be tricky. And I think one of the biggest surprises that people have when they start making their own bread is they assume, they get some success with all-purpose flour, maybe all-purpose sourdough, and they're like, cool, I'm going to go even further back to the basics and get a grain mill and grind it myself. It's obviously going to be easier. It's obviously going to be better. And that's not always the case. Sometimes there's some really big surprises, and it actually can be quite the shock. I remember the first few times I tried that for my family, my husband was like, what is this? And it was, not edible. It was brick-like. It was dry. It would choke you on the way down. It just wasn't great. So it's a rude awakening. And there are some things you need to know about fresh milled flour. So back in season 15, episode 7, I had the pleasure of having Mike Vaona on the podcast. He is the founder of Rosehill Sourdough. You've likely seen his products taking the internet by storm. He has the coolest silicone bread mats. He has these amazing, I'm trying to remember the material, but it's like a pressed
wood pulp. Yeah.
Wood pulp. Yeah. These proofing baskets that are magical. So we talked all about sourdough back on that episode, but he recently reached out to me and said he was doing a fresh milled flour showdown where he's getting really deep into the ins and outs of all the different types of grains that you can grind at home and how to use them and which ones are best. And with Mike's engineer brain, I knew this was going to be good. So I couldn't wait to have him on. So here we are. Welcome, Mike. I'm excited to talk.
You. I'm excited too, and I'm excited that I'm in good company because I have a lot of questions still too. So
yes,
it never ends with fresh milled flour. It's been a really fun process. I'm excited to get into it a little bit with you.
I bet. Yeah, I'm not saying there's some topics you never know everything, but there's some that you just feel closure on, and this is one I do not feel closure on whatsoever. So
no, and I think the cool thing is about this topic too is it's very much alive right now. Like in the terms of we are still creating new grains for different outcomes, like different outputs. Like we still have people who are doing work to make the best grains possible. And we still have access through a miracle to grains that have been around forever. So we have such a variety. And that was really the inspiration when I started getting into this fresh milled flour showdown. Is it started, funnily enough, really with a thing that we had talked about in the last episode, which was you had some questions around fresh milled flour, and I had some tips for your listeners about how I've approached in the past. And then after that episode, I was like, you know what? I was inspired. I was like, I need to do this more. And so I started getting into it more. At the time, I was actually changing my flour vendor. So I started going with Central Milling for all of my flour. And I noticed that they had just such a variety of flour to choose from. And I realized like, man, I've been just skimming the surface just by doing research on red versus white, winter versus spring. I thought I had known so much about flour. And then all of a sudden I'm like, what's Yacora Rojo? What's Sonora? What's purple straw? Wait, what? Rouge de Bordeaux? Like, what are all these different things? Like, and so it was really cool to just be like, I just need to try to unpack everything and relearn everything. And so I came up with this fun bracket idea to put flours head to head against each other, different grains, ancient grains, heritage grains, modern wheats, versus popular gluten-free options, and just mill them all and try them and see where that got us. So that's why we're here today to chat about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the one thing I've often thought about this topic, there's some areas of these old-fashioned skills where we have pretty good documentation from our ancestors or the past, if we can find it, or it's just kind of knowledge that you tap into. In this world, and maybe I'm wrong, I feel like there's little pockets of information, but a lot of it truly has felt lost, like completely lost. Where, I know there were cultures who really knew einkorn or really knew spelt or really knew those grains, but we don't have it all together anywhere to my knowledge. I mean, I have good books, but the books always feel like there's holes still. So I'm excited as, modern homesteaders, as modern bakers, as people who are trying to tap into the best of the old and the new to figure out how can we make this new canon of knowledge with our modern techniques and these ancient grains or these hybrid grains. I think it's just a really interesting topic that it's just like we're pioneering it kind of all over again.
I totally agree. And I think that, I mean, a lot of the motivation of what I even do at Rosehill, which is like trying to demystify sourdough and help people understand and tap back into something that is so human. I think it's a lot of that comes from a motivation of these things that are lost. Like we've talked about this before in the last episode, but it bears repeating that like our great grandparents did something that we don't do anymore, that our parents didn't do, and our grandparents barely did.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden we've got a few generations of knowledge gone because of the ease of food. And now we're starting to question of like, was all of that accessibility and all of that ease, was that a good thing?
Yeah.
I don't know actually anymore. And so being able to look at a recipe and go, oh, this calls for a packet. Literally some of like my wife's mom's, my mother-in-law's recipes or my mom's recipes literally calls for like a seasoning packet.
Yes.
It's like, well, wait, hold on. What's in that seasoning packet? It's like, there's stuff in here I can't either pronounce, or there's little terms of phrase that you learn to read, like, wait, artificial flavor, natural flavor. Well, natural flavor, that must be okay, right? And then you read some of that stuff, you're like, maybe I should just like actually get real spices. So,
yeah, right.
So unpacking all of that and like going back, you're right. It is lost. Like we have some stuff, but we are putting the pieces together. And this is like that stuff I love, taking old and new and merging it. I mean, you'll see me working with an ancient grain and a pH meter. Like,
yeah. No, I love that though. I love that. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm streaming pH values to an iPad, while I'm working with one of the oldest cultivated grains on the planet. So it is fun to mash those two things together and just learn more. And then I'm not great, admittedly, of sharing this stuff through a newsletter, but I'm trying really hard because I do think it's important for people to know about this stuff and not necessarily debunk, but challenge some things that I've read or heard about like what people's motivation is to get into fresh milled flour too. One of the things when we kicked off this process, it was really just a deep dive in fresh milled. So I was really just using like Hard Red Spring or Yakor Rojo, or just like a couple of these like more modern wheats. And I was really trying to just like dig into this claim I found about the loss of nutrients after milling. And I kept seeing the same phrase repeated on the internet, 30%, 70%, whatever the number was. It was some eye-catching number of nutrients are gone within minutes of milling. But I couldn't find a single study that said that. I couldn't find the source of that claim. I kept seeing the same thing repeated. And I asked my followers, like, if you know a person who's really knowledgeable, tell me, because I want to talk to them about this, because I can't find where this is. If anything, the stuff I've read about letting flour oxidize after use is beneficial to baking.
Yes.
That there's antioxidants in the grain that become activated when milled that actually protect the nutrients that are in the grain. So there was a lot of motivation on the fresh milled stuff just to demystify and understand. I keep saying demystify, but I felt mystified.
Yeah. Oh no, I have too. Yeah.
Yeah. Just understand how to use it better. There's a motivation for more people to mill their own grain. For me, I love it as like the fact that I can buy a 50-pound bag of berries and they can last for a pretty long time compared to whole wheat flour, which you do have to use milled whole wheat flour. It's less of like a nutrition thing, I think, and it's more of like a rancidity thing just because there's oils in that flour. Yeah. So I do think from like a storage perspective, it makes sense to buy berries and mill stuff yourself. But there is some of these things that kind of unpack. So one of the things like right off the bat that I even mentioned in my last interview was like sifting flour. And I got really into sifting my flour as like one of my ways. And I was like, no one's going to do this.
Thank you. Because I have tried it, and I have even said you can sift. But then in the back of my mind, I'm going, yeah, right. Like,
honestly, like when I did it in small scales, it was fine, and it was like experimental. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm sifting, and then I started trying to make lots of loaves with sifted fresh milled flour, and I'm finding myself like buying all these gadgets to sift flour. I'm like, no one's going to do this. Like, let's take this off the table and see if I can just use it unsifted. So I think, I still think as like an entry, like there's still really great recipes that call for sifting fresh milled flour. It makes sense. Remove some of that bran and some of the larger pieces. It's going to interrupt your gluten network. It's going to be easier to work with. If it's your first time using 100% fresh milled, try it. Like, try to sift it. But it is not the end all be all. Like, I tried that. I tried extended oxidation. So in one of my newsletters, I talked about oxidizing flour for like hours, days, weeks, and months. And then I did a fresh milled, like right out of the mill into the water. And I compared all of those loaves. I made them all on the exact same day. And what I found was like the stuff that did oxidize, it was easier to work with. Like the dough was easier to work with. The end result was lighter. Like you said, like the brick loaf that a lot of people get when they first try. I don't think people realize how much water fresh milled flour soaks up, or whole wheat flour in general soaks up. So you really need to up your water. And this is going to get into a pet peeve of mine around like the home baking community and like this weird goal people have around hydration. Like it's literally just a number, and people put so much emphasis on trying to, there's cool experiments going on. Don't get me wrong. I've got a buddy of mine who's working on a pizza dough recipe where he's just upping the water until his dough breaks. And it's really fun to watch that process. I think he's at 105% right now. And so it's cool to see and have him learn and like understand this stuff. But when people like want to argue with me about the semantics of hydration, if they should include the flour and water from their starter, and I was like, it doesn't. If you do it the same every time, that's all that matters.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're trying to figure out a number so you can pair it to your friends on Instagram, you are doing this the wrong way. Stop wasting your time with that. Like, just have something that works for you and that's repeatable for you, and you're good to go. And that's why I actually stopped using that term altogether. Like in all my recipes, I don't say 80% hydration. I just say 80% water, because that's, or 85% water, 90% water, whatever. But when I throw a recipe out, like a whole wheat, 100% whole wheat recipe that calls for 95% water, someone goes, oh man, that's going to be so wet. It's like, you're thinking of that number wrong. Like, you have to match the amount of water to your flour. What's your flour demanding?
Yes.
And if you're using a bunch of fresh milled rye, it's just going to, like, you have to do 95. You just have to, because it's just going to soak up all that water, or you're going to be working with a dry dough ball. So I think that's one mistake people think, is they get this number in their head from using all-purpose flour, pushing 75%, 80% with that. And they're like, oh, my dough's sticky. It's so wet. I can't go higher than that. But they're not thinking that those are two puzzle pieces that have to fit together. You can't just take one without the other. So that's an important lesson I learned too, is just like upping the water amont.
Okay.
And
Can
then
I interrupt you
go
really
for it.
quick?
Sorry, I've got so much, and I'm going to go forever. So interrupt me.
I love it. I want to go back to oxidation, because I mean, and I have said this, I will confess, and I've heard people say it, although I have been skeptical of it as of late, when they're like, you want to use freshly milled flour because it's warm, and then you put it with your yeast and it's all happy or whatever. Obviously, that doesn't give it a chance to oxidize. You said oxidation of the flour, which I've also observed does increase the quality of the loaf, or makes it better. What is the mechanism that's causing that to improve the loaves? Is it, just walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you can, there's like, when businesses do something, like specifically in flour, there's probably a really good reason why they do it. So when mills introduced like bleaching and bromating, that was to oxidize the flour. And the reason why they wanted to do that was because it prepared the flour to be ready to be used faster. So when flour is freshly milled, especially with like steel rollers and stuff, it's like the whole production process of industrial flour is like a different thing. And we can get into like, there's still mills that make really high quality white flour. Like I got an email from somebody the other day. They're like, I can't believe you're using white flour. And I was like, they're like, you can just buy that from the grocery store. I was like, let me set one thing straight. Like, I don't buy my white flour from the grocery store. Like I buy it from a reputable mill, and it's an organic, white flour. The way they mill it is different. Like, it's just a different thing. So like, let's separate those two things too. Just because the color's white doesn't mean that it's the same. Quality varies greatly. But anyway, so they do this process, and I'm going to take a quick pause because now my dog is whining because I know his bone just rolled under the couch.
Oh no.
And he's mad at me that I'm not getting it for him. So give me 1 second.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm going to find him over here. Yep, there he is. There's the couch, and there's the bone. All right, cool. Here you go, buddy.
Crisis averted.
Yeah, we got it. Okay, let me bring it back to the blanket here. And we're going to lay down right here. Good boy. There we go. Okay, we're back.
Yes. Okay.
All right, so
awesome.
we'll get back into it. So I was talking about oxidation. So these mills, they introduced processes to prepare the flour to be able to make bread better. Now, my understanding of that process has to do with preparing the proteins for bread making. So that is the oxidative process that happens. We use this term oxidation as like a really bad word because we want things like antioxidants.
Yeah.
The grain has antioxidants to prevent the oxidation of vitamins of nutrients. Let's just say that. Okay, so those are being preserved. Just again, to the best of my understanding of what I've researched so far. But the proteins, the oxidative process that happens to them, those prepare the bread, the flour for bread making. So it's a better bread product when you allow the flour to oxidize. So I was skeptical of the oxidation claim too. And then I started really thinking about like, why would an industrial mill spend more money to do more processes to the flour if there wasn't some benefit to the end consumer? And the things I read about with bromating and with bleaching, it was all about to do with oxidation. There's some preservative stuff in there too, but it was to prepare that flour. So when I ran my experiment and confirmed those results of flour that has sat for a bit of time after milling was better. Now,
like how long? What did you find? Did you find a time frame that was ideal?
Yeah, like the 1 month flour was the best of the bunch. But the conclusion I came to in my newsletter was like, I'm not going to sit here and recommend that you plan a month in advance for your bread. That's crazy. So I tried an experiment where I was like, I'm just going to mill it when I feed my sourdough. It's like, then at least it's oxidized for 8 hours because it was a pretty good trend. Like it was like direct into the bowl on one side and then, 1 month on the other side. But all the stuff in the middle followed a pretty linear trend of like how easy the dough was to work with. So even just a few hours was easier to work with than the stuff that went directly in the bowl. But in the end, it was like, I'm still not, the fact of like, I have to remember to mill it when I feed my sourdough, it's still not great. And so like, I even came back to in the newsletter, like just mill it into the bowl. Like we'll work on other things to help with the 100% process. But yeah, the oxidative thing, it was interesting. So if you are somebody that's like really into this and you're struggling with it and you've got the time, or you can like, oh yeah, I can, maybe batch mill some flour and then use it up over the week or whatever. I can't find anything that says that's going to do anything to the nutrition of that flour, that it's going to be degraded. So, if someone can find me a study that shows that it gets degraded, please send it to me. I like to think of these things like I'm always open to having my mind change on this stuff because I want people to have just the best information available. So please send it my way. Now, the end result of the whole 100% fresh milled flour loaf was my daughter didn't like it.
I've run into that with kids. Yep.
So in the end, we ended up going with a 60-40. So 40% bread flour and 60% fresh milled flour.
Okay.
It worked better with my process. We ended up flipping those numbers again. So we did 40-60. So 60% bread flour and 40% whole wheat flour. And that loaf was just like, that's my go-to loaf. Like that's just what I make now because it's so good and it's so easy to work with. And the dough is just magic. Like it doesn't stick to the bowl. It doesn't stick to my hands. Like everything just dialed in so well. So in the end, it was like, yeah, you can do 100% fresh milled. And if you want to learn how to do that, awesome. But like, let's question why you're trying to get away from these white flours and know that you don't have to be 1 or 0, like all or nothing on this. Like there is a lot of happy middle ground where you're still getting a ton of benefits from whole wheat. And my conclusion was really like, I don't need to convince the people that are doing 100% bread flour or fresh milled flour to put more bread flour in their loaves. I'm trying to convince the people that are doing 100% white flour just to put some whole wheat flour in their loaves. So that's the kind of end thing I came up with was like, I intended to be able to help a bunch of people move into 100% fresh milled flour. And then what the ending was really I just want people to stop doing 100% white flour loaves. Like the benefits of whole wheat are so good. Like the benefits of fermentable fiber in your gut are so important. And you can't get that from supplementation. You have to eat that. And the amount of nutrition in the germ of I think we talked about this last time. People supplement wheat germ.
Yep.
Like it's crazy. Just eat it. Like
exactly.
Put it in
Exactly.
bread.
Yep.
Crazy. Yep. So anyway, so then all of that then led into this, like, I know nothing about grain clearly because there's so many options. And so I literally bought I went online and just like Barton Springs was a really great resource for me. I just started buying whole berries, like whatever I could find. So this is your Colorado. I mean, I've got a whole here. Rouge de Bordeaux. We've got some Sonora. We've got Emmer. We've got Einkorn. Maris-Widgeon. We've got like just stuff I'd never heard of before. So I basically then categorized those into, we ended up doing 16, 32, 16. I have my bracket right here. Let me bring it up. We ended up doing 16.
Okay.
So I'll rattle through them really quick. Just so
please do. And just to clarify, this is maybe a dumb question. When you're doing these tests, it is you're using sourdough, not commercial.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
figured. I mean,
let me.
would make sense.
So I'll lay the foundation of the test. So it was. There's a recipe I have in Baking with Rosehill Sourdough that is like a choose your own adventure type recipe. It's for people looking to try one of these ancient grains or heritage wheats, and they're trying to experiment. And that's the recipe I use. So it's 75% of a good white base flour. I really like that. I'm not paid by Central Milling. Like there's no affiliation with me except I love their flour. Artisan Baker's Craft. I love that flour. It's an organic bread flour. I can't believe they're able to sell it for the price they are to make money, but Central Milling, they clearly care about bakers, and they are not like, I'm not going to name names, but there are companies right now selling flour for such a high price, and they're using such marketing buzzwords because they think it's cool to talk about heritage wheat or whatever. And they are charging so much money for flour, and it makes me so upset. And like, I won't work with those companies. It bugs me so much. The way they're marketing is very aggressive on socials. Anyway, I won't get into it because it like flour to me, the whole point of this is to make bread baking accessible for me. And like, it's the reason why the margins of my products are so low. Like, because like I want people to be able to afford them, because I want people to bake. Like I want everyone in the world to either bake or know someone who bakes and be able to get fresh sourdough from somebody. And so, I really love the Artisan Baker's Craft. Like it's a fantastic loaf. There's nothing done to it, which is rare. Like it's hard to find flour that's not enriched. It's not enriched. It's 100% organic. It has it hasn't even been malted. Like a lot of flours are malted for extra enzyme activity. We don't need it in sourdough. We have the benefit of a living culture to give us extra enzymatic activity. So it is the purest form of a white flour you can get, and it happens to be just a rock star flour.
Nice.
So that is my base flour. 75% of the flour in the loaf is that, and then 25% is this fresh milled. And yes, the flavor of the fresh milled, the characteristics of the fresh milled flour did come through even at the 75-25. I chose that ratio because especially with my gluten-free flours that I was using, I didn't want to overwhelm the loaf and have it be difficult to work with. So it was all the exact same recipe. I only tweaked it twice, once for rye, it's on a bake, and then once for teff on a bake, because the teff wanted a little less water and the rye wanted a little more water. But that was it. I basically, that's the only thing I tweaked. So, let me just run through all 16 really quick.
Yes.
And then we can kind of talk about anything specifically that you're interested in. But basically, I divided them into different matchups that I felt made sense. And there are broken down into ancient grains, heritage wheats, modern wheats, and we can talk about the difference between those three.
Yes.
And then gluten-free. So we've got Emmer, Einkorn, Coruscant, which people might know under the brand name Kamut. But Coruscant is the grain. Hard Red Spring, Maris-Widgeon, Red Fife, Buckwheat, Teff, Spelt Rye, Purple Straw, Sonora, Yukor Rojo, Rouge de Bordeaux, millet, and amaranth. So that was the full bracket.
Okay.
And then basically we went head to head on each side to all the way to the middle. And we have a winner of the Fresh Real Flour Showdown. I'll be putting them out in my newsletters every week. Kind of what the newsletter is really a showdown of two. I tried really hard to bake all 4 loaves and write a newsletter in 1 week, and I wasn't able to do it.
That's a lot. Yep.
So what I decided to do was just do the whole bracket, all the matchups, just one-on-one every time, get to a winner, and then go backwards and write them all up. So we do have a winner. We're down to our the last 8 right now. We just finished our last newsletter, went through the Sweet 16, and we're down to the Elite 8 now. So I don't know if the timing is going to work out to align with March Madness. That would just happen to kind of work out if it does. But yeah, so it's been really fun. I think the biggest thing I've learned specifically around the differences in wheat is like how different they actually look.
Yes.
I didn't even occur to me. I don't think we ever see it because, like, I'll give you an example here since you've got video on here.
Yeah.
So this is Rouge de Bordeaux. We can kind of see that there. So you can see it's like a brownish red.
Yep.
Maybe a little bit smaller. And then, like, let me get a good one here. So this is Coruscant or Canute. You might have seen. So I got that from Central Milling. So, like, the difference between the two of those, you can kind of see in my hand the differences. So, like, the larger golden ones, that's Coruscant, and then the smaller red ones right there, that is Hard Red Spring. So you can see, like, the difference in sizes, the difference in color. Super interesting. So that was really cool. Rye was, I don't know if I've ever seen like a milled up a rye berry before, but I thought that was like a really interesting shape. It's like a lot skinnier.
Yep.
And the smell of rye when it's milling is kind of crazy. I'm not a huge rye fan.
I'm not either. I try.
In my newsletter.
I keep waiting to maybe it'll grab me at one point and I'll love it, but I'm just like, eh.
Yeah, some people really do. And I think the biggest thing my biggest beef with rye is like a lot of people think it's like their savior in terms of sourdough. It's like, oh, use rye in your sourdough starter. I had somebody comment on a live one time, what's the best flour for sourdough starter and why is it rye? I was like, it's not rye for me. It's
leading
not.
question.
Yeah, exactly. But like even look at that. Like so this is Sonora.
Oh, wow.
It's beautiful.
It is. Yeah.
Super light. And Sonora is great. Sonora is a heritage wheat. And that was kind of cool too, like learning the difference between heritage, modern, and ancient. So ancient.
Yeah, break that down for us. Because I kind of thought heritage and ancient were the same thing, but they're not.
So no, they're not. So it is a little fuzzy. Like there's lots of bleeding lines, but I'll kind of try to be as paint with a broad of brush as possible. And then if people are interested, they can do a little more research. But ancient grains we think of as the einkorns and emmers. These are written documentation of thousands of years of use of, I think the oldest one's 3,000 years, something like that. I can't remember, but long time ago. Like these are the first cultivated wheats, the farros, and the emmers and the einkorns. And there's some really good articles that I linked to in the newsletter about like what came first and why do we think they came first, and is one really a cross of the other that kind of happened naturally. And there's some cool stuff there, but they're old, and largely unchanged. And then heritage wheats are wheats that were like Mariswigen is heritage, Sonora's heritage. They're wheats that were made through open pollination. So we've got a long history of creating new varieties of tomatoes or whatever through open pollination. It's like, I want to take the best of this thing and I want to take the best of this thing, and we're going to hope that they make a baby, and then that new thing is going to have the characteristics of the two. And that's where we get a lot of our heritage wheats from. That's kind of the definition. There's kind of a turning point in the 60s and 70s, so relatively recently, where we go into then like modern wheats. Modern wheats were then, they might have used open pollination, but they might have used also like different breeding techniques that weren't available before that time frame. And so then we classified those as modern wheat. So like my favorite modern wheat, is Oh, there goes my dog. Sorry.
Noise.
We'll run that back again.
Yep.
So my favorite modern wheat is the Yacora Rojo, and that was bred specifically for like higher yields, and so it wasn't grown as tall, and like there's different reasons why. There's different outputs of why like a breeder might try to make a new version of it. The craziest thing I learned, and I got so much pushback for this, and I was like, just read, because I thought this was not going to be the case. Because again, I started seeing these marketing buzzwords of non-GMO, and I was like, that's so weird. Like, what is GMO flour? Like, let me go find a GMO flour. There's no GMO flour grown in the United States commercially.
Oh.
No GMO wheat in the US grown commercially. There is one that was approved for commercial growth recently. I want to say within the last like 10 years. That one has not started to be grown yet, though, commercially. And that was a one that was developed. Oh man, I can't remember who developed it. It wasn't an American company. I can't remember who it was, but they developed it not to be like a lot of things that we've read about GMOs is like, so they're pesticide or herbicide resistant. It wasn't for that though. It was specifically for drought tolerance, but there's other versions of wheat that do really well in drought tolerant areas that are easier to grow. So this specific breed of GMO wheat just isn't grown commercially in the US yet. It could be, I mean, it might overtake commercial viability at some point, but as of recording, as far as I could find, according to USDA and other sources that I found, there's actually no GMO wheat grown in the US. So
I bet that marketing. You said that got you in trouble on the internet. I bet there's like arguments.
Oh yeah, people are like, you're crazy. Of course there is. And I was like, I can't find any. I found 11 crops that are GMO, and you wouldn't expect them to be. One of the big ones is alfalfa for cattle feed. So like I didn't know that. Yes. A lot of them aren't GMO for human consumption. A lot of them are actually GMO'd for like to make corn and corn syrup. Right. It's to make other products. It's not like these grapes. I don't know if grapes are, I can't remember, but it's not like you're going and buying a raw product off the shelf. I know we can get into like this is a whole different discussion, but it was a big discovery for me because it was something that I just assumed.
Same.
I was going to find a GMO wheat. I started researching and I couldn't find one. And lo and behold, why I couldn't find one. So again, it's like one of those things of like a marketing thing where it's like non-GMO. It's like, because all wheat is non-GMO. So at least currently in the United States, there's none grown here. So commercially. So that was a cool thing to learn. But I think that was the big distinction with modern wheat. I think we say modern wheat, people go GMO. Yeah. It's like, no, that's actually a different, that GMO could be put into modern wheat because that technique would fall into like the bucket that would make it modern because those processes didn't exist.
Yeah.
And they weren't done by open pollination. But I mean, technically someone could make a wheat right now through open pollination and we probably would still call it a modern wheat, even though it would be a heritage wheat, so there's weird things
it's
here.
Muddy. Yeah. Sure. That makes sense. Okay.
But I think in general, it was really cool to do a lot of this research to understand why these things were done, why they were brought here from different locations, here being the United States, from different countries, what the benefit was for making those changes and the benefits to the farmer and to the mill of having higher yields or being more drought resistant or being more pest resistant or whatever it was naturally. That was a lot of cool research that went into it. So, but yeah, I think the craziest thing was just like, each newsletter, I do a top-down photo of the two grains I'm doing side by side just to see the difference, like in those two grains was really, really cool. One of my favorite ones, I could start telling people who won certain things.
I don't want to steal your thunder though. Like you do.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
If people want to learn, like the thing is like the newsletter goes into more depth. It's not just like this person won, or this grain won, right? It really does talk about the grain and like why it's important and where it comes from and stuff. So one of my favorites though is teff. I have never used teff before.
I have not used teff.
It is naturally gluten-free. It's from Ethiopia. It is it's used in injera, which is a Ethiopian flatbread. It's a fermented flatbread. I've had Ethiopian food before. I've had injera before, and it's really good. Like this flatbread that they make. I would have never guessed that it was gluten-free. Whatever reason, the protein structure, whatever that's in it can make a stable flatbread, which is really cool. And it was so good. That became like my darling of the bracket. Like I wanted it to win. All of the winners were chosen blind taste test through my wife and daughter.
Okay.
So I sat them down, eyes closed, mouths open, feeding them bread. Completely blind. Like at one point, one like fell and my daughter opened her eyes. She's like, no, the blind taste test. So it was all done just strictly flavor. And then I added my own like notes of like how it was to work with the flour. And so each one was done just by blind taste test. And really, in the end, Tef did really, really well. Did not win. Sorry, Tef. I wanted it to win.
But we like you. We still like you.
We like you. You should really try Tef. Tef was really cool. I can't remember where I sourced my Tef. I want to say Tef came from Bob's Red Mill. I got a lot of organic stuff from Bob's Red Mill. One of the ones I really wanted to do well, Amaranth. I wanted Amaranth to do so well.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Amaranth did not do well.
Poor Amaranth. Okay.
I want, like, the write-up on Amaranth was so interesting. There was so much cool stuff around Amaranth, just what a nutrient powerhouse Amaranth is. And I wanted it to be so good. I'm going to stick to trying to figure out how to use Amaranth because of that. Mm-hmm. It's apparently the closest protein structure of a grain to animal protein is in Amaranth. So I know we're going to get really, really weird here, but not weird's the wrong, nerdy. Sure.
Nerdy. I like nerdy.
So protein is like these essential amino acids, and they're made of amino acid strains and chains, and there's essential ones. That means our body can't make those, right? So like we need to eat essential amino acids to make sure that we're getting the stuff that our body can't make. We can't make those amino acids. So when something has all of those essential ones, we call them a complete protein. So Amaranth is a complete protein, which is really interesting. So it has all of the essential amino acids, obviously in different levels. But like if you eat rice and beans together, that's a complete protein because it has all the essential amino acids, right? So we know this stuff. Wheat is lacking in one or two, like depending on the variety. So it's not a complete protein, but it has a lot of those amino acids. So I like to try when I can to find a grain like this to add to my bread, because how cool is that? Now that's a complete protein in bread. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So
I'm going to stick to Amaranth, and I'm going to keep trying to use it. Amaranth is these little tiny berries you can kind of see in there. They're seeds, I believe Amaranth is. They're not like a grain. And it is really interesting. I really want to try to figure out how to use it. It gunked up my mill so bad to the point where I had to disassemble my mill and clean it. And Como's like, don't take it apart. And I was like, the rice ain't working.
It's not. Yeah.
It's coming apart. Yeah. So I will not be milling Amaranth anymore. But I'm thinking because they're so small, maybe I could sprout it. Or
or like a cereal grain, like porridge or oatmeal kind of, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll maybe I make like a little, cook down and porridge, exactly like a little water or something, and like actually cook it and then like fold that in or something. So I'm going to keep playing with Amaranth because that was another sweetheart that was terrible. Like buckwheat tasted so bad.
Yeah. Millet
was honestly some of the worst bread I think I've ever had was the millet loaf. It was that one. I think that one went into the compost. I don't think any other bread went into the compost bin. Okay. I think millet went into the compost.
No millet.
It was that bad.
No millet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a shame because so many opportunities for puns with millet. Like I was so bummed.
Oh yeah.
Just the pun opportunity with the grain millet. I was so excited for writing these newsletters with millet, and then I was like, I can't advance it just on probability.
Unfortunately, I mean, good for you for staying true to the scientific method, but
exactly.
You tried.
Yeah.
Okay. Friends, I'm interrupting this episode for just a sec to tell you about something kind of cool. So I'll never forget the time we visited a natural doctor to talk about Christian, my husband's allergies. And he's had them since he was a kid. And he's kind of one of those people who's basically allergic to everything. So we've tried a lot of things over the years to help deal with that. And I'll never forget this particular doctor's recommendations. He told us that we needed to put in a whole home air filtration system, that we needed to stop working in dusty barns and outbuildings, and that we should get rid of all of our animals. And of course, if you can imagine, I walked away pretty grouchy about the whole ordeal because none of those things were really an option for us at the time. We're going to have barns, we're going to have animals, and we're not going to move to a sterile house in a big city. And so honestly, I kind of ignored all of those suggestions that he had for many years. But I've started thinking about them again recently because I've heard more and more doctors that I trust, natural type doctors, talk about the importance of clean air in your home. The problem with that is full home filtration systems are really complicated and really expensive. So I was very excited when I came across Air Doctor. Air Doctor is an award-winning air purifier that eliminates 99.9% of contaminants like allergens, viruses, smoke, gases, mold spores, and a whole lot more. It's a little unit, so you don't have to hire an HVAC company to come redo your entire house. You just take it out of the box, plug it in, and off you go. And it has this thing called an ultra HEPA filter, which means it captures invisible particles that are 100 times smaller than standard HEPA filters will catch. So we have our unit in our bedroom because, you spend more time in bed than you do in any other place in your life, right? Sleeping. And I love knowing that for that period of time, especially in the summer when we have all the pollen and the histamines that kind of make us miserable, I know that our bodies are getting a break from all of those contaminants that create so much misery during the summer months and beyond. So if you're interested in having cleaner air in your home, I'm excited for you to give Air Doctor a try. Head on over to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code HOMESTEAD to get up to $300 off your unit today. It also comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So to get this exclusive offer just for old-fashioned on-purpose listeners, go to airdoctorpro.com. That's airdoctorpro.com and use promo code HOMESTEAD. And now back to our episode. All right. One interesting thing about the amaranth, I've had this weed in our property for years. It's a pain. I can't get, I'll dig it out and it'll come back. It's like the most aggressive weed. And if it goes along like the fences and I don't chop it down, it's just like monstrous. And I finally realized last year, that too. That's another one. But this weed is amaranth. Oh. And if you let it go to seed, which you shouldn't, which I have, which is why I have it in abundance. Right. But the little seeds, you can shake it off and I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And it's really pretty, right? Do you have the red one?
Yeah, I got like the reddish golden red. Yeah, at the end of the year. So I'm always like, wait, now I shouldn't let it go to seed because it's insane, invasive. Right. But now I'm like, maybe I should if I start to want to harvest it, then I probably won't have it anymore. So maybe it's like a catch-22 if I actually start liking it. So I had no idea, but.
Yeah. So if you've got it, I think that's super cool. I want to grow some of this stuff. We're in the process of trying to figure out how to grow more of these things. And that's really funny though, that watch out for amaranth. Because that was one of the ones I was thinking about because it's so cool. If I can break the code on it, I would really like to. I really want to grow one of these grains for sure on my property and be able to make straight, milled within, 10 feet of my house, bread. I think that would be super, super cool. So one day we'll get there. But yeah. And then the ones that ended up doing so well, honestly, were the ancient and the heritage grains. I think there's a reason why, again, you go back to companies make these things and for better, for worse, companies make decisions for money most of the time. Right. And we've been having these conversations, really deep thoughts on Rosehill right now, because we have some really cool potential opportunities coming our way. And we want to make sure that it fits why we're doing what we're doing. And so we're having these conversations right now. And this thing hit me the other day. I know this is not a business podcast, but
sometimes it is. No, go. This is good.
Yeah. This thing hit me the other day where we're told as consumers all the time, quality, price, speed, pick two. That's you've heard that before at some point. If you're buying something, a product or a service, quality, price, speed, pick two. And that struck me the other day. I was at an entrepreneur meetup and I was talking with this guy and I just had this thought of we've always been told this thing, so we've taken it as truth. But what if there's four? And the fourth one that's never talked about is company profit. And it's never talked about because it's just assumed that you can't negotiate that one out. So we actually have 4. We take company profit because that's definitely going to be one that we choose. And now we let the customer pick from the other 3 and they get 2 of them, quality, price, or speed. But the thing that hit me was like, I don't have a great margin on my products because I want them accessible. So I've got price. I have independent QC processes on all my products because I want them to be the highest quality. So I've got quality. And I've got labels hanging off of a printer because I'm fulfilling them now because I want them to get out as fast as possible. So I've got speed, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then what am I missing? What am I doing differently? It's like, oh, we're not making much profit. It's like, okay,
Sure.
well, but when that's not our main focus, then it's like, well, then that's okay. Like, I get that we need to make money so we can continue to do this. We can't continue to provide these services for people if we don't have the cash to do it, right?
Yes.
But we also don't have to make cash the number one goal. We can make maintaining those 3 things, that availability to our customers, the number one goal. The reason why this comes back to flour and why I think a lot of these heritage and ancient grains did so well in the matchups is because at some point along the way, someone bred a more modern variety for higher yields.
Yes.
And the things that might have gotten left behind are subtleties that maybe were left behind that weren't picked up on because the yield, that profit, was overshadowing
absolutely
the rest of the stuff.
Yes.
And we really, like I said in the very beginning of this, that 25%, even though it's only 25% of the loaf is freshman flour, you could tell. Like the blind taste test, they'd be like, I didn't expect that. Like, and my daughter's amazing, like for a lot of reasons, but she's got a really cool palate for being 8, 9 years old. She's gonna be 9 next month. Like,
awesome.
And she was able to pick up on things. She doesn't have the language for it yet, but she was able to pick up on things that, and her and my wife had these really cool conversations about stuff where, funnily, like in the matchups, like one might have won because it was like more bready was like the word they ended up going with.
Yep.
But then in the next matchup, they'd be like, I didn't really like how bready that one was. This one like had a more subtle flavor. So I like that one. So I was like, okay, so this one won because it wasn't subtle, but this one won because it was subtle. And they're like, yeah, but we don't know why. And so I think that's okay too. Like they're clearly tapping into like an emotional part of their brain that doesn't process language. So they can't explain the why, but they were able to say like this one was better. And I think the reason why stuff like, I mean, I'm looking at the stuff here like einkorn and the Sonora, why those did so well was because of like, they just have something in them that these modern wheat varieties that I tested just didn't have. Like there was something in it that was subtle that just got lost for the sake of the higher yields. I get it. Like I understand as a farmer, it's hard. Like I get that you're planting for maximum yield and you have to do things to feed people. I get it. I think I'm going to come back to a point I've made many times on this podcast and others and posts and newsletters or whatever. This is the first time in history where we get to do this for fun.
Exactly. Yes.
And if you want to play, you can play with these. We have access to these, not just because your neighbor grows this wheat, but because you can go online at Barton Springs Mill and buy Rouge de Bordeaux. Like that's pretty cool. And so I do think it's a fun time to be able to play with those subtleties again. And as a consuming class, be able to say, hey, I really like Sonora. Can we make some noise about Sonora and get more people growing Sonora? Why can't I go into the grocery store and buy a bag of 100% whole meal Sonora? So it's cool that we have this opportunity as a group of people who have the time and resources for the first time in history to have sourdough as a hobby, be able to create brands that have popped up like mine that can survive because there's enough of you that want to learn how to do this stuff and have cool modern tools, but not lose sight of ancient techniques and ancient grain. So anyway, that's my spiel. I had a really fun time doing it. I hope people sign up for the newsletter and read through it because it was genuinely really fun learning a lot of this stuff and coming up with some favorites. And I'm going to break the code on Amaranth and we'll figure it out.
Okay, please do, because then I will know what to do with all the stuff in my yard. With my weeds.
So good.
Oh my gosh. No, but I think that's such a good point that we do have the best of both worlds. And, so many times, and I romanticize the past all the time, and people go, oh, I wish I was born 100 years ago. And I could see that. But there's so much of me that I'm like, no, this is awesome, because we get these options and we get to play and we get to understand. Like you said, you're using your pH meter with your ancient grains, and we get really the best of both worlds. And so the fact that we can mix the old with the new, that's like my thing. That's my language. And I think it's really exciting here that we are using einkorn, or we're using Sonor, or we're using Coruscant, that have been a staple of human history for thousands of years. And now we understand why, and we can choose it over the more modern versions if we so choose. And I think it's pretty awesome that we get to do that.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Coruscant was not a favorite.
Not a favorite. Okay. Yeah. I had Bob Quinn on the podcast, and he's a doll. I absolutely adore him. And so I did get a bunch of Kamut and just to play with, but I haven't played with it a lot yet. So it's compelling in its nutritional value. I don't know, how that compares, if it's that much more superior over the einkorn or the spelt, but his book was good. His book was good if you haven't read it.
I have not. I'll have to check it out.
Grain by grain, I think it's what it's called.
I will look at that, because that would be cool for this research too. And I think it's the Coruscant's interesting, because I think it's one of these things where, like, it's a darling of the internet for a bit, and then it kind of fades. And I think, for better or for worse, I mean, Kamut's done a really good job with literally Kleenexing it. Like, I don't know if that's that's the marketing term, but like the fact that I get people writing me, they're like, "Well, yeah, what about Kamut?" And I was like, it's Coruscant. It's in the list. Like, that's what I'm doing. I'm not buying it from Kamut. I'm buying it from Central Milling, but like, it's the same name, or different name, same product though.
Right.
A really interesting grain to work with. Very yellow. Like, it looked like I was working with cornmeal. Like, the loaf itself was so vibrantly yellow, which I feel like is a really interesting thing to still get after baking. Because a lot of times you lose that color, or everything just kind of darkens, but the softness of the yellow of that grain, even again at 25%, like, really punched through. When I was doing my 100% whole milled stuff, I was doing 100% Coruscant also, and trying that. And I was like really trying to get that to work. I never broke the code on the 100% Coruscant. But it is a cool one, just to kind of add a little punchy flavor to, the loaves. And it didn't make it that far in the bracket. I mean, I think it had a really hard first matchup though. I really wanted to put it through its paces. I put it up against Hard Red Spring, which is one of my favorite. It's a modern grain. Yeah. And it's like, but I really wanted to see, like, is this better? Like, people say, oh, it's better than the modern grains for whatever reason. We went on flavor, and like with the working of the dough, and Hard Red Spring I felt was better flavor wise, and was able to work with the dough better. Obviously, people are going to have their own opinions about that, but it was a hard first matchup. But somebody had to go against Hard Red Spring in the beginning, and I felt like Coruscant, if it was that good, it could hold its own.
And it is the darling of the internet, which is people don't understand. I've been on the internet for 15 years producing content, and people miss how viral things go online and how it becomes gospel. And I'm like, wait. That started with this blog post, and then it was parroted by this blog, and then this blog, and then this blog, and then it went viral here. And that's why you all think this. Not that there's sometimes truth in there too, but it's not just on Coruscant or not just on anything else. It happens so much. And I'm like, you got to go back to the root to see where this wild-eyed excitement came from. It's fascinating.
Totally. Yeah. My dog is being so needy right now.
That's all right. My separation anxiety one gave up, and he's probably sucking his thumb in the corner outside.
So, oh, poor guy.
Mom hates me. So,
she'll be back, buddy.
She'll be back. Okay, so I want to respect your time. I know you got a lot going on, but as we kind of land the plane here, can you just give us a quick best practices recommendation? Because I know we talked about oxidation and 60-40, 40-60. Like, if someone's like, okay, I've been struggling with freshly milled flours, what are just some of the things you found in your tests that will help me have better success? Yeah,
I think what good advice for like everything else in life, but like, don't try to go at it 100%. Straight away.
But I like going at
yeah.
I'm all in, baby.
Here's the thing then.
It is good advice.
Here's what I want you to do is like, do the 100% one, then also, and at the same time, do a 75-25. Like, just get used to working with the grain. I think for whatever I'm reading this book again, which I absolutely love. It's called Infinite Game. And I've read it a few times, and I'm reading it again right now because I'm having these big thoughts about Rosehill, and I'm getting very deep in this stuff. But, it's such a good reminder though, that like, we're not playing a finite game. We're playing an infinite game. And someone trying to just like, I want to get to 100% first try. It's like, that's such a finite mindset. Think of it like 5 years from now, you want to be really awesome at baking bread. Great. Today, make your 100% loaf, but also try just 25%. And then next week, try 35%. And the next week, try 45%. And I think the best practice there is just know that whole wheat wants more water. And so give it a little more water.
Yes.
And it's probably going to ferment a little bit faster if you give it a little more water. So give it a little bit less sourdough and play around with those things. If it's a little bit loose and you're used to only using 2% salt or 1.5% salt, up the salt a little bit because that's going to bind the proteins together a little bit more. So like a lot of my recipes for using lots of whole wheat, I go all the way to 3% salt because I want to bind everything. And people are like, that's a lot of salt. And it's like, yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things, like it's really not that much. Like it is a 50% bump up from 2% to 3%, but it does help like bind those things together. And then in the end, if you're like, wow, I'm getting really good at this recipe, but I really don't know like that I'm putting 3% salt, I'm going to try to go back to 2. Yeah, try that. Bring the salt down, bring the water down, maybe a little bit, but experiment and be open to wanting to just learn through the process instead of an end result in mind. Know that the knowledge that you're getting from trying these different fresh milled flours, that's what your goal is, right? And so eventually you are going to get better at it. The bread's going to get better and better. You're going to get better as a baker. You're going to get better as a miller. But take it slow and just start with the 25%. I've got a great recipe. It's in all the newsletters. But the thing I've been doing for all the fresh milled stuff is 80% water, 2.7% salt, which I know sounds like really specific, but it's just because the math, the size loaf I make, an 875 gram loaf, it works out to 12 grams. So it's like a nice even number. 17% sourdough, 60% bread flour and 40% wholemeal. That's like what I've been pushing them to if I really like the flavor. Otherwise, if it's my first try doing it, I do a little less water. So I do 75%. I up the salt to 3. So that goes to 13 grams. I do 20% sourdough. So a little bit more sourdough there because the water's a little bit lower. So you're playing that trade off. And then the 75% flour and the 25% fresh milled flour. So those are kind of the two recipes. Like start with the 25%. If you're like, wow, I really love this. It was really easy to work with. Then you can bump it to the 40%. And then just kind of take those lessons with you. Okay, Mike said, if I'm bumping up the sourdough, or if I'm bumping up the whole wheat, I got to up my water. If I up my water, I got to bring down the sourdough. And if you kind of just play with those variables, then you'll start to develop recipes that work for you. And if these percentages, you're like, Mike, what the heck are you talking about? Baker's percentages is a really great skill. It gives you the ability to write recipes and remember recipes way better than remembering the weights or the cups or whatever.
Yep.
So it's all done by weight. I've got a great resource on my website. It's totally free. That'll teach you how to do baker's percentages. I've got a YouTube video that's really simple that gives examples on how to do baker's percentages. It's a good skill to learn. And again, don't think you're going to get it right away. Like any, college course textbook, read it 3 times. If you still have questions after the third reading, DM me and we can figure that out together.
Awesome. Man, that's great advice. Good stuff.
It's kind of generic.
But that's all right. It's good. It's like life advice too. Bread and life. Honestly. It's all the same.
Honestly.
This is so good. Thank you so much for this. I feel like we could go for hours longer, but
yes.
I think the best course of action is to have folks sign up for your newsletter. And that's just on your main website. Is it pretty clear once they go over there how to find the newsletter? Yeah,
if you go to rosehillsourdough.com, there's a newsletter tab. If you do /Dough Dynamics or Dough-Dynamics, like it's there. That's the name of the newsletter. It's called Dough Dynamics because I'm a big engineering nerd.
Yep.
And so, but if you just go to rosehillsourdough.com, there's a little tab there. There's also a second tab called Free Sourdough Resources. If you haven't gotten those, if you click that and then you also join my newsletter as you do that, and you'll also get those free sourdough resources just sent right to you. That's what the heck is baker's math and how can you help me with that?
Awesome.
That's I'm starting sourdough from scratch. I've never done it before. How do I start one? And then it's I've got a sourdough starter. I've heard you do this thing where you put it in the refrigerator and not leave it on the counter. How do you do that? And that third one is to teach you kind of how to use less flour and use your fridge in between feedings.
Awesome. I really appreciate your content because you are so thorough. Engineers for the win, truly.
Yeah, totally.
So definitely guys, go check that out. Also, I adore Mike's and Rosehill Sourdough's products. Like I said, the proofing baskets are like nothing I've ever used. The silicone mats are lifesavers. He has spatulas. Like he just thinks through things just as well as you would imagine after listening to him talk here. So please, if you need, and they're affordable, they're really affordable. So go check out all of the merchandise there. It's really, really good stuff. It's what I use every time I make sourdough. So appreciate that. It's worth the investment.
Your link's still active, by the way. So people can use that. So we'll put that in the show notes. It should be rosehillsourdough.com. It should be /CP for coupon and then /Jill. I'll double check that. And if it's not that, I'll just make it that.
Perfect. And we'll drop it in the show notes. So you guys can click on that too. Yeah. Perfect.
And then last time, we did like a cool bread mat giveaway and that seemed to, people really like that. So if we want to do that again, let's do that. Just say, hey, I made it to the end of the episode. Heard you on Jill. You got any bread mats left? And we'll pick a number and based on the response, and we'll give some bread mats out.
Awesome. So you do want them how did we do that last time? Did they email?
They just DM me.
They DM me. Okay, so do that.
They can email me.
Yep.
Whatever. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. I appreciate that. Super generous. So
it's fun. Yeah. Like they're the CEO, the old CEO of Lego. I'm a big nerd, so I listen to interviews of the CEOs of Lego. Yeah. Who doesn't?
I mean, obviously.
At one point he was talking about revenue and I just loved his perspective. He's like, revenue to a business is like air to a human. Like we need it to survive, but we won't get anything done if we spend all day breathing. And, for me, it's like, that's exactly how I feel about this company. Like as long as we're in the black every month, like we've never taken any outside investment. Like we're doing this all from product sales. Like people buying our products continues to allow us to move our message forward. We just want people baking. And we truly believe that sourdough bread is some of the best food on the planet that you can get. And it's a thing that has been lost, like we said, over generations. And please don't confuse sourdough in a plastic bag in a grocery store as the same thing that's coming out of you or your neighbor's oven. Like the marketing is trying to trick you that it's the same, and it is just not the same.
Nope.
So I just want everyone to either be able to bake or know someone that can bake. And that's my goal. And so that's why I'm here. And that's why we sell the products that we sell. And that's why we put the resources out that we do. And that's why we write the recipes. And that's why we have so many discard recipes. Like I just want people using sourdough. So, So that's why we're here, just to kind of bring it full circle. And I'm super glad that for this opportunity, as always, just to be able to chat with you, because I love that you love this so much. So it's very easy to get excited when I'm chatting with you specifically about this. So thank you.
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And I mean, we'll have to have you back to talk some more about the next discovery you have, because I feel like you're always working on cool stuff. So we'll do it again.
Always. We've got 5 products in the pipeline right now. Hopefully come out this year.
Yeah. Okay. Fabulous. You're moving and shaking. I love it. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Cool. Thanks, Joe.